If you've never read the Bible, it can be a little intimidating because it is a big book and people often think that it's a difficult book, but most of it really isn't difficult. So in this video, I want to tell you a little information about what's in the Bible and hopefully get you excited about reading it. And at the end of this video, I have an announcement and an invitation for you. The Bible is an amazing book because it reveals who God is. It tells the story of how God created us, why He created us, and how He is in the process of saving us from the gigantic mess that we've made in this world. So what's in this book? Well, the Bible is actually not one book. It's a collection of writings. It's a collection of books written by various authors at different times and places in history. So it's broadly divided into two sections that we call the Old Testament and the New Testament. I'm putting the books of the Old Testament up on the screen. Hopefully you can see these. The first book is the book of Genesis, which describes how God created the world. It's the beginning. And there are many familiar characters in Genesis: Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. All these people's stories are told in the book of Genesis, so it's a really fun read. The next book is Exodus. Exodus describes the life of Moses and tells about how God used Moses to deliver the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt. It also has the Ten Commandments and the beginnings of the law. The next three books, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, are also law books. They tell a lot of the laws and they given through Moses to the people of Israel. And it's interspersed with historical narratives as well. So there's, stories about what was happening during that period of time in history. Now, the next section of books are also historical narratives. All of these books detail the history of the people of Israel and their interactions with God. So these are really easy to understand. You'll read them and understand them, and it just tells you the history. The next section of books is known as the wisdom literature: Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs or Song of Solomon. These really are less about telling the history and more about giving you wisdom for life, or they're for worshiping God. The Psalms are a collection of songs that were sung in worship to God. We no longer have the music, but we still have the words that were used for worshiping God. And then the book of Proverbs gives you, just bits of wisdom for life. After that, we have the prophetic writings. These are writings that the prophets wrote in response to something the Lord was saying to the people of Israel. These were the words of God spoken to Israel at different times in their history. And if there's any part of the Bible that's difficult to read, I would say these prophetic writings can be a little bit difficult because they have a historical context. So if you don't understand what was going on in the history of Israel at the time that that prophet wrote this down, then you might not understand why something is being said. So in general, it's not a good idea to just open up to these prophetic writings and try to apply them to your life, because these are not things that were written to you personally for your life. And in general, that's a good thing to understand about the Bible as a whole. Not everything is written to you. This isn't a book that you should just open to any page and say, okay, this is what God is saying to me. No, this is telling the history of God and humanity. Some things apply to you, some things don't. You might find some application for your life in anything, or you might learn something about God, but you shouldn't just assume that everything that you might read is specifically being directed toward you. Okay, so those are the books of the Old Testament. Now let's move on to the New Testament. Now, the books of the Old Testament were everything that happened, the highlights of what happened before Jesus came. The New Testament begins with the birth of Jesus. So the first four books of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, these are all accounts of Jesus's life, death, and resurrection, told from different perspectives. Four different people wrote down their perspectives of Jesus's life, and they have some details in common, and then there are places where their details differ. So those tell about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. The next book is the book of Acts, and that tells about what happens after Jesus was resurrected and after he ascended into heaven. It basically tells what happens to his followers after that. The Holy Spirit comes upon them, they go out, they do miracles, and it's all about the beginnings of the early church. It's a very exciting book to read. It's fun. So after that, we have the letters. All of these books are letters that were written to churches or to a person, and they were written by people like the Apostle Paul, the Apostle Peter, and the Apostle John. Now, these guys weren't sitting down to write the Bible. They were writing letters to groups of people expressing important truths about the faith. Sometimes they're expressing important theological concepts. Sometimes they're expressing practical teaching for life. And so what happened was they sent these letters to the churches, and the churches felt like these things that the apostles expressed were so important in the faith that they began passing these to other churches. And so these writings were passed around and they were embraced, and they eventually became part of the sacred writings. They became part of the Bible. But it's important to remember that these were originally just letters written to express important truths to people who were believers in Jesus. So the final book of the Bible is the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation is a vision that the Apostle John saw of the end times and things that were to come. Now, this vision is filled with symbols and metaphors, and not everything can be interpreted, and it's difficult to know what the proper interpretation is, which is why the book of Revelation is probably the most abused book of the Bible. There's people who have taken one thing from the book of Revelation, they've interpreted it in a certain way, and then they've started a cult. So we have to be careful with the book of Revelation, but it's a great book to have at the end of the Bible because it tells us about God's plans for the future. And I want to give you a quote from the book of Revelation. And this is a spoiler alert, so if you don't want to hear the end of the story, then skip past this in the video, okay? So it says, I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." He who was seated on the throne said, "I am making everything new." Then he said, "Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true." So, great ending. And this is describing the plans that God has for us in the future. As you read the Bible, you're going to understand God's heart, his love for people, and his plan to restore everything that has been ruined or destroyed, to fix all that is broken, and to give us true life with him for eternity. It's an amazing book. Now, one of the reasons that people have the idea that the Bible is difficult to read is because for some people, the only exposure they've had to the Bible is with the King James Version. The King James translation was made a very long time ago, and the English it uses is archaic, so it's difficult to understand. There are many modern translations of the Bible into English, and if you read from one of those, the Bible is not going to be a difficult book. So if you've never read the Bible, where do you start? Well, the beginning is a good place to start. But if you're the type of person who likes to read the end of the book first, like my husband does, well, then I would recommend starting with the life of Jesus. I would read the Gospel of John and learn about Jesus and see what is happening, the climax of this story. Really, the whole Bible is about this person of Jesus Christ. And the climax is when Jesus appears on the earth. So if you like to read the end of the story first, then start with the book of John and read about Jesus Christ. Now, if you're a person who likes to let the story unfold gradually, then start at the beginning. Just realize that as you read, it's going to take a long time to get to the point of the story. So you're going to learn a lot about God along the way. But you have to understand that there could be some dull moments. And if you end up getting bogged down in Leviticus or Numbers, then I would recommend going to the New Testament. So now for an invitation. Hopefully I've got you excited about reading the Bible, and now I have an invitation for you. I'm going to start something new on my channel, and I want to invite you to participate. Starting next Wednesday, March 18th, I'm going to do a live stream to read the Bible. I'm just going to start in the book of Genesis at the beginning of the Bible and just read the text aloud. And if you're there with us live, then you'll be able to put discussion points and discussion questions there in the chat, and we'll be able to talk about it together as we read. So if you're looking for a group of people to read the Bible with, this might be a good opportunity. And I've never done anything live before, so we'll see how this goes. And if it's not a total disaster, then I plan to do this regularly on Wednesdays. So it will be Wednesday, March 18th at 12 p.m. Central Time in the US, and that is 5 p.m. GMT, and that's 9 p.m. if you're in my time zone. So I hope you can join us live, but even if you can't join us live, it will be recorded and placed as a video on my channel, so you'll be able to watch the recording if you want to. So I welcome your participation, and I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday live. Thanks.